Good morning and welcome back. You're watching World News and I'm your host, Klaudia Czerwińska. Munich airport was forced to halt operations Thursday night after a number of suspicious drone sightings. The incident is just the latest in a series of airspace violations which have been occurring across Europe in recent weeks. 17 flights were cancelled and 15 more diverted to other airports, affecting some 3,000 passengers at the German airport. According to German media, it was local residents who spotted the drones and alerted the authorities. Munich airport reopened early on Friday. Just last week, swarms of drones were noticed over critical infrastructure in the Schleswig-Holstein region. In September, a number of airports in Denmark and Norway were also forced to close temporarily due to drone sightings. Drones have also been spotted over critical infrastructure in Sweden. The investigation into the drones' origins and possible connections between the incidents is still ongoing, but Danish authorities are not ruling out Russian involvement. We're in a new type of war, said Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, commenting on recent Russian hybrid efforts in Europe. Some of Moscow's vessels have been spotted circulating close to a Polish pipeline near the port city of Szczecin. Kazimierz Łysiak has more on the Russian threat in the Baltic region.
We have another incident now close to Szczecin port. 2 days ago it was an incident close to our Petro-Baltic platform and our pipeline. Both are Russian vessels. And in fact, we have a new incidents in our region, I mean Baltic Sea, every single week.
The Polish Interior Ministry confirmed on Thursday that a Russian civilian vessel sailed close to a gas pipeline and left immediately when called out on the radio by the Coast Guard.
Russian security services are looking for more and more ways to target and destabilize Poland and other EU states and to sow disagreement inside our country.
This is yet another case of Russia testing Europe's patience in recent weeks, mostly with drones flying over critical infrastructure in several countries. And Poland says the continent needs to realize the gravity of the situation.
Some of us, we like this definition like full-scale aggression or incidents or provocation. No, it's war. A new type of war, very complex, but it's war.
Analysts point to several reasons why Russia sets off these provocations. One is testing the waters.
Both sides are constantly adjusting. Russians are coming up with the new ways of testing us, while we have to continue adjusting our standard operating procedures.
And the other is sowing chaos and panic in European societies, all part of Russian leader Vladimir Putin's plan aimed at discouraging the continent from backing Ukraine.
He wants us to talk about these issues. He wants that our societies will be, let's say, less supportive towards Ukraine.
But politically, that plan seems to have the opposite effect. At the informal summit in Copenhagen, European leaders not only backed Ukraine once again, but also backed the creation of the so-called drone wall, counter-drone measures to be set up across the continent in cooperation with Kyiv. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
Hungary blocking Ukraine's EU accession was the main focal point of the European Political Community Summit in Copenhagen on Thursday. Despite lengthy talks between Europe's 50 leaders on how to support Kyiv, the divisions are still visible. Our EU correspondent Angela Skujins has more.
Divisions on how to support Ukraine at the European Political Community Summit on Thursday in the Danish capital emerged early in the morning. It started when the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán openly clashed with the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk regarding the greatest threat facing the European continent. Now, these comments came as both leaders were arriving at this summit, established in 2022 amid Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. The aim of these talks, among other things, aim to drum up support for the war-torn country. So it's quite rich that we heard this commentary on the doorstep arrivals of this meeting. It started when a journalist asked Orban about the greatest threat facing the European continent, to which he responded, saying it's economic stagnation. Tusk interjected, stating it's Russia. Here's a taste of the tiff that ensued.
Who's the main threat against Europe right now?
Provocation.
No, it's a real question. Please, Prime Minister.
The real danger, economic stagnation and losing competitiveness.
But the Polish Prime Minister wasn't alone in standing up for Ukraine. At the tail end of the talks, the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, reiterated her resounding support for Ukraine to join the European Union family. She stated that shared security and a peace for Ukraine with Russia can be guaranteed through strength.
I will not allow one country, and I will certainly not allow Viktor Orban to take decisions upon the entire European future.
But what is at stake for Europe's future? We know that a plot is developing, spearheaded by European Council President Antonio Costa, to allow Ukraine to move forward with its EU accession bid without being stopped by that stubborn blockade from the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. The issue here is that for Ukraine to move forward with its EU accession bid, requiring a qualified majority vote, so 15 out of the 27 heads of states voting in approval, it requires 27 out of 27 green lighting the change. Orban has made it clear that he does not support this proposal, but what we know is that European leaders are willing to stand by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky when it comes to Russian aggression, Russian President Vladimir Putin, as well as some of his well-placed friends in the European continent, such as Orban. Angela Skujins from the Danish capital for TVP World.
The summit in Copenhagen wasn't thoroughly planned, says Tomasz Włostowski, a managing partner at EU Strategies. In an interview with TVP World, he said that some of the member states cared more about the meeting than others.
Nobody fully understands what a drone wall is. I mean, it sounds nice. We sort of understand in general what it's supposed to do, but what exactly is it? I don't think anybody understands. That's number one. Number two, it's also, I think, clear that there are some member states that are more focused on this topic, and those are the member states here on the eastern border that have experienced Russian incursions. So the countries further to the west, they don't care that much about it, and they don't have the sense of urgency. And then there's also this moment, this aspect of who's going to benefit. Because essentially, if we're building something together, there's going to be European money in it. Well, who's going to sell the things needed for this drone wall? Is it going to be drone manufacturers in Poland, or is it going to be some IT companies, service companies from France, Germany, and so on?
Czechs head to the polls on Friday and Saturday to elect their new parliament. The election will be pivotal as it could shape the country's domestic direction as well as its international orientation. Polling stations will open at 2 p.m. and operate until 10 p.m. on Friday. The vote will continue on Saturday between 8 a.m. and 2 p.m. After choosing the political party they wish to support, voters may cast for preferential votes for individual candidates of that party. After the election, the Czech president will nominate a candidate, usually the head of the winning party, to form a new cabinet and act as the new prime minister. Incumbent Prime Minister Petr Fiala, a conservative pro-Western leader, is a staunch supporter of Ukraine. He faces the current frontrunner, populist Andrej Babiš, who campaigned on increased wages and growth while vowing to limit Prague's support for Ukraine. In Warsaw, demonstrators marched on Thursday in support of the detained members of the Global Sumut flotilla. 2 protesters were detained after vandalizing the building of the Polish Foreign Ministry. Pro-Palestinian protesters marched in front of Polish government buildings, parliament and the presidential palace. The demonstration called for the release of activists from the international flotilla who tried to deliver aid to Gaza and were detained by Israel authorities on their way to the Strip. There are 4 Poles among the detained, 8 journalists, 2 activists and a member of the Polish parliament. Demonstrators also gathered in front of the Israeli embassy in Warsaw on Thursday to protest Israel's military operations in Gaza. Pro-Palestinian protests also took place in other major Polish cities on Thursday, including Kraków, Łódź and Poznań. Poland's debt is surging and the projections for the next few years don't look good. And it's not just the debt that could become a burden for Poland's government, but the cost of servicing it. With yields on government bonds still high, interest payments on the debt could also soar. Maciej Wilowski has this report.
Poland's debt is expected to surge in the coming years. According to the government's projections published in its annual debt management strategy report, public debt could rise to 75% of gross domestic product by the end of the decade if left unchecked. But there's another indicator the government should be watching.
Debt servicing costs. So this is the most important indicator that should be observed and monitored and might impact fiscal policy. What is the cost of paying interest on debt?
Yields on government bonds, which reflect investors' perceived risk of holding Polish debt, determine those costs.
10-year bonds, so the bonds that mature in 10 years, have an interest rate of 5.5%, which is quite high.
That's just as high as in the summer of 2023, before the central bank first started cutting interest rates to stimulate the economy. Since then, the National Bank of Poland has cut interest rates 5 times, including 3 cuts this year. Bond investors also keep an eye on the budget deficit. At nearly 7% of GDP, Poland's deficit is the second highest in the European Union when measured as a share of the economy. That's more than double the 3% limit imposed under the EU's excessive deficit procedure. Surging defense spending since the Russian invasion of Ukraine has fueled that deficit. Such high deficits might only be sustainable if the economy is doing well.
It is possible to keep deficits at those levels for some time, especially when economy is growing quickly, which is happening right now.
That remains the case for now, with Polish GDP rising 3.4% on a yearly basis. High deficits and the lack of progress on reducing them have already prompted 2 credit rating agencies, Moody's and Fitch, to lower their outlook on Poland's debt. While the agencies stopped short of an actual downgrade, the government might not be so lucky next time.
We might face some negative feedback from the market, and maybe 2026 is going to mark decreases in the ratings of the Polish economy.
That could trigger a serious loss of confidence in the bond market.
Then we're going to see the yields of Polish bonds increasing because the risk is going to be greater.
Which in turn would make the government's debt burden greater.
That servicing cost will also be increasing, so every year we will need to spend more and more only on interest on those bonds.
While the government is attempting to bring down the deficit, progress has been slow thus far.
We are engaged in fiscal consolidation, but it is very gradual. Going from 7% to 3% will take a decade.
Political gridlock, including President Karol Nawrocki's power to veto any budget legislation passed by the government of Donald Tusk, could further delay the process. The government could also be reluctant to cut social spending ahead of parliamentary elections in 2027.
Honestly, for me, it's quite difficult to believe that the government would be brave enough to present fiscal consolidation measures, significant ones, before 2027.
With expenses and interest rates both uncomfortably high, the task of managing Poland's debt could become more burdensome for the government. For TVP World, I'm Maciej Wilowski.
And so this would be all the latest news for now. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm Klaudia Czerwińska, and I hope to see you back here on TVP World for more news and features for you to enjoy.